Welcome back. This is Lisa O'Halloran. I am a graduate student in the Leadership and Organizational Development Program at Silver Lake College and am currently enrolled in BUS 514, Human Resource Management. In this series, I review Gary Dessler's textbook titled Human Resource Management. Today, we take a closer look at Chapter 5 on Personnel Planning and Recruiting. Let's get started. If you recall in Chapter 4, we looked at job analysis, the prerequisite to the recruitment and selection process. Once we have identified the duties and human traits, being the experience, education, certificates, etc., we move through the process outlined here. First, we decide what positions to fill. We do this through workforce planning and forecasting, which we will cover shortly. Second, build a pool of candidates. We can recruit both internally and externally. Third, have candidates complete application forms. At this point, we can also conduct initial screening interviews. Fourth, use selection tools that are available to us, such as tests and background checks, to identify the best candidates. And ultimately, 5, decide who to make an offer to, typically through an interview process. According to Dessler, workforce planning is the process of deciding what positions the firm will have to fill and how to fill them. It embraces all future positions, from maintenance clerk to CEO. Remember the SWOT analysis we discussed back in Chapter 3? In that example, we have external and internal factors, and while managers cannot anticipate or control the external factors, such as the economy or recessions or swings in consumer spending, what they can control is their strategy. So managers should start by linking strategy with personnel planning, asking questions like, are we developing new product lines, expanding into new areas or regions, adding production shifts? By looking at expected labor needs and comparing those to the supply of internal candidates and likely supply of outside candidates, we can forecast our needs. Basically, this is a supply and demand analysis, and once the gap is identified, action plans can be created to fill the gap. Here I share some of the techniques we can use, starting with trend analysis, which is studying changes in employment levels over time, typically years, to estimate future staffing needs. It also considers workforce demographics and separations, such as resignations and retirements. Ratio analysis is another simple approach. This is where we base forecasts on the historical ratio between two data sets. As a former sales director, my best example is to look at a causal factor like sales volume and the number of employees required to service and sell that volume. For example, in a smaller market, I had an account executive for every $200,000 in annual sales. Scatter plots are a graphical representation of how two variables are related. Here, we could plot the same ratio data points for multiple years to forecast future needs. The last technique, the Markov analysis, is a more complex mathematical process that forecasts the availability of internal candidates by tracking the probability of promotion through a chain of positions. For example, in my former world, it would be sales assistant to inside sales to outside sales and ultimately to manager. Once needs are determined and gaps identified, we look at the available labor pool. Internally, we can track the qualifications of our current employees. This personnel inventory, if you will, compiles information on education, skills, completed company courses, assignments that are of interest to the employee, and their career aspirations. If a small organization, this may likely be done manually by each supervisor for the members of their team. Another option is personnel replacement charts, often used for higher management positions. On this slide, I have included a sample replacement chart noting the names of internal candidates and a measure of their readiness for the next position above them. Another tool is the position replacement card. That is actually a card for each position that shows the names of possible replacements with more details, including the candidate's performance history, training, and a note about promotion potential. When there is concern there won't be enough internal candidates to fill expected openings, the organization looks externally. Here, secondary sources can be used to forecast the available labor pool. The Bureau of Labor Statistics publishes monthly, quarterly, and annual data that is extremely helpful in assessing the potential candidate pool. As a side note, here at NWTC, we use this data to forecast educational needs, both for types of products meaning programs of study and credential types, as well as anticipated volume. There are also HR services and websites to assist organizations with forecasting efforts. We don't hire everyone who applies for a job. Therefore, effective recruiting is the key to building a strong applicant pool. Without enough candidates, organizations cannot effectively screen for and hire the best. Here I share a recruiting yield pyramid to demonstrate the need for strong recruiting. Let's say we need to hire 50 new analysts. How many leads, i.e. potential candidates, do we need to generate to successfully hire 50 qualified new employees? Well, the pyramid uses historical ratios on conversions through the hiring process to give us the number. The historical data for this organization is that 1 out of 2 offers are accepted. 2 out of 3 interviews result in an offer. 3 out of 4 candidates accept an invitation to interview. And 1 of 6 leads are typically invited in for an interview. So by applying those ratios to our need for 50 new hires, we now know we need to generate 1,200 leads to yield our 50 new employees. Filling open positions with internal candidates has great benefits, including we are already familiar with the employees' strengths and weaknesses, and they also need less orientation time. We can find candidates via job postings that can be placed on internal boards, on internet sites, or communicated via email. To fill higher level positions, we can use a succession planning system that utilizes the replacement chart and position card techniques we just reviewed earlier. In larger organizations, this may take the form of leadership development programming that provides training and exposure to employees considered the best and brightest. The Gannett company I worked for did this quite well. They actually worked with Harvard to create a leadership development program that launched with a full week of programming at corporate and then included follow-up monthly webinars, access to Harvard content, and a mentor relationship. So how do we fill positions when we do not have internal candidates? Well, here I share just some of the many approaches an organization can use. Internet job boards are often the most popular. Sites like CareerBuilder, Monster, Indeed, even the company's own website. You can also use social media, especially LinkedIn, to capture passive candidates or to create your own virtual job fairs. Employment agencies can be public, like job service and workforce development, and private agencies, which charge a placement fee for each position filled. Temp agencies can also be used, like Manpower, Kelly Services, and Adecco. Executive recruiters or headhunters will do broader searches for high-level positions. I was placed in a VP role in the greater Chicago area by an executive recruiter. College recruiting at career fairs for entry-level technical and management trainee positions is also very popular. And never underestimate the power of referrals. Asking current employees to recommend and refer candidates. Often incentives are paid to employees for referrals after the new employee is on board for a specified amount of time. So how do we create ads that are going to get the right candidate? Well, let's first take a look at the AIDA model discussed by Dessler in Learning Outcomes 6. AIDA is a marketing concept. It's actually a stimulus response model that explains consumer behavior. And all consumers move through this process at some speed or another. And it starts with awareness. This is when the consumer becomes aware of a category or a product or a brand. And this usually occurs through advertising. And that advertising creates interest. The consumer becomes interested to learn about the brand benefits and how the brand fits with their lifestyle. Desire is the step where the consumer develops a favorable disposition toward that brand. And action is just what it is. The consumer forms purchase intention. They actually shop around, engage, and make a purchase. Well, this model can actually be applied to help wanted advertising. We can start with a compelling headline and or graphic to capture the reader's attention. We don't have a lot of time. We want to draw them in rather than them miss us entirely and move on. Ideally, we could tie this to the human traits we've identified of successful candidates. For example, if we want someone who is driven and impactful, we may head the ad with, "Are you our next key player?" Interest and desire go hand in hand, and the reader does allow us a bit more time for detail here since it's all about them. Pull them in with details on the work. Are there opportunities to be challenged, to travel, to develop and lead a team, to manage an exciting new project? Is there training available? Is the salary amazing? Is there the opportunity to pursue higher education or tuition reimbursement? All of these things will create interest and ultimately desire to move the candidate through the process. And finally, the ad needs to have a call to action to entice them to apply today. There are more minorities, women, and older workers in the workforce than ever before. This growing diversity is driving the need for organizations to be more proactive in recruiting diverse candidates and in meeting the needs of these workers. To start, companies need to understand the barriers that prevent some groups of candidates from applying. What is it about our company that they might find unattractive? What does not work for their needs? With that information, we can formulate plans that address the needs. And then finally, we can incorporate these plans into our recruitment program with strong consideration given to the wording of our ads and what sources we use for recruiting. Some of the possible solutions could be flex time. For parents, especially single parents, having the flexibility to start an hour later or finish an hour earlier to handle childcare is tremendous. And actual childcare benefits, do they have on-site or different services available? Sometimes simply supervisor attitudes. How do your supervisors feel about the need to be more accommodating? And do they struggle with the fact that it might not be perceived as being fair? So there could be some training opportunities available for your leadership team. Another example might be full-time benefits for part-time employees, that simple need for sick time and for insurance. And for our older workforce, perhaps phased retirement. Can they shorten their days? Can they work 3 days a week? So these are just some of the few solutions that organizations can consider to recruit and retain a diverse workforce. Well, that's Chapter 5, folks. Thank you for joining me as we explored personnel, planning, and recruiting. Until next time, happy human resource management. Thank you.